Good evening. Thank you for coming. This is our last leg, and we've been pretty successful, we feel, with the first two sessions. So we got to do a lot of previewing before we got to you, so feel privileged. We'd like to give special thanks to Barbara Cohen, the Executive Director of Lake Lure Classical Academy, for allowing us to use this facility in order for us to be able to physically distance all the attendees. We certainly appreciate our collaboration with the school. We would ask if you have a cell phone, if you would please silence it so that you don't disturb anyone who's giving a presentation. Thank you so much. In the past 2 years, the town has consulted experts to assess our infrastructure, to include the status, life expectancy, the recommendations and necessary repairs, and the cost estimates to meet the requirements for the dam, the water sewer system, and lake dredging. You will have an opportunity to ask questions on the note cards that we distributed to you, and then please put those in the basket. We will ensure that these questions will be answered at this session or at a later time. But first, we're going to give you some important information so that you'll be fully informed on the issues at hand. Our consultants represented here today, and you will have an opportunity to hear a summary of the recommendations for the water sewer system, Labella Associates, for the dam, Schnabel Engineering, and for the lake, SDG Engineering. You'll also have a chance to hear from our state oversight representatives on these plans, including the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, Water Quality, Wastewater, and Dam Safety. In addition to consulting these technical experts, the town hired a financial consultant to analyze the town's resources and help us ascertain what was needed in order for us to make these necessary improvements. A representative from Withers Ravenel will summarize their recommendations. And finally, we consulted the policy group to educate our state legislature to help us acquire additional funding for our infrastructure projects. We have held numerous meetings in order to prepare the budget for Lake Lure for the town for the year of 2020-2021. The decisions that we made support the significant infrastructure projects that must be addressed. After significant deliberation, the decision was made to raise taxes, to increase the water sewer rates, and the lake fees beginning January 2021. The council made these decisions, did not make them lightly or precipitously, and they understand that increases of any kind are a burden on every household. But these decisions were made because we had no option. We had to take action. Our moderator will lead the panel introductions, but first I would like to recognize some distinguished guests. Senator Ralph Heiss from our North Carolina Senate District 47. Thank you for being here. And Brian King, Chairman of the Board, Rutherford County, is joining us by Zoom. We appreciate so much everyone who is our partner and ally in this project. I'd also now like to ask our moderator, Scott Dadson, the Executive Director of Isothermal Planning and Development Commission, to lead us in introductions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Let us begin our introductions of the Lake Lure Town Council and Town Manager. With us today, we have Mayor Pro Tem John Moore, Commissioner Patrick Bryant, Commissioner David Diorio, and Commissioner John Kilby. At this time, I'd also like to introduce Shannon Baldwin, the Town Manager, who will introduce his staff.
Thank you, Scott. Fire Department, we have Chief Waycaster. Just raise your hand. Police Department, we have Chief Humphreys. Parks, Rec, and Lake Department, we have Dean Givens. And for Public Works, we have David Arrowwood. To my left, we have Sam Carr, Finance Director. And we have Mitchell Anderson, who's our Assistant Community Development Director and is helping us with the IT and communications. He's in the back. And then also Laura Creegey, our Communications Specialist, who coordinated this entire effort. And also Michelle Jolly, our Town Clerk. Amy Wright, our Human Resources Coordinator. She's helped us today. And then last but not least, Linda Ward, our Customer Service Specialist, who you met as you entered the facility. So we want to thank them for being here.
We have two groups of folks here today to talk about the issues in front of the town. First are the state representatives representing various state agencies. And with us today in the room, we have Landon Davidson from NCDEQ, Water Resources, Water Quality Regional Operations. From NCDEQ Dam Safety, we have George Eller. The town has also worked with a series of consultants to help in shaping where they are today and how they are moving forward. And those consultants include Steve Metcalf from the Policy Group, Jonathan Pittman from Schnabel Engineering, Seth Robertson from Withers Ravenel, Reese Walsh from Labella Associates, and Kurt Wright from SD Engineering right behind me. First, some ground rules. One of the things that we are trying to do, of course, is keep social distance. And as a result of that, we have put questions. You may have picked up a card that you can write questions down. Our staff over here, Patty and Sarah, are from Isothermal Planning and Development Commission. They're in our workforce and economic development groups. They're here to assist. If you need another card, raise your hand and they will come and make sure that you have one. If you have a question, if you have a concern, if you need some help shaping a question, our staff is here to assist you with that as well. We will collect these at the end of all the presentations, and then I will read the questions out, and various council members, state reps, and consultants will try to answer your questions to the best of their ability. Also, it should be known that this is the third of 3 meetings that we've held today, as well as other information that has been submitted to the town in the form of questions and concerns. The town is putting together an FAQ that will be available via the website. So your questions are important. They're going to try to address them and make sure that there's an answer to them and you have a source to go to them in the future following this meeting. Right now, what I'd like to do is introduce the town engineer's Kurt Wright, who's going to guide us through all of these technical presentations, and then we'll go into questions. Kurt?
Thank you, Scott. And it's good to be here with you all, and I'm glad you have come out for this public meeting. I want to point your attention to this slide, and it's in your brochure, and you'll see this from time to time shown on the projector here. It's an important slide because we're trying to demonstrate to you that the heavy infrastructure needs of the town of Lake Lure, they're interrelated. You can't just treat dredging at the lake as a silo and feel that you have addressed that problem and there's no other issues. You can't just look at the sewer system, focus on the sewer system alone as a silo and try to fix that and ignore the dam and dredging and so on. So what we're trying to do with this slide is point out the fact that there are significant major heavy infrastructure issues related to this town, and that's what we're trying to address. With our technical presentations, our goal is to help bring greater understanding to the critical repairs that are needed in the town. For our first presentation, I'd like to call upon Reese Walsh with Labella Associates to provide a brief overview of the town's sewer system, including the critical repairs that are needed and summarizing the research his firm has done to explore potential alternatives to address these critical issues.
Good evening. It's good to be with you. I'd like to thank all you for coming out. My name is Reese Walsh. I'm with Labella Associates. I have a colleague of mine here in Maroon Brain, Houston. We're the on-call engineers, and we are looking specifically at your subaqueous sewer system and your wastewater treatment plant. So what I'd like to do is start with a little bit of history so you understand what your system is, where it is, some of the issues with the system, what our goals are, and then go through some of the proposed solutions and some of the community involvement that is required. So to start off with, you can see the green arrow, that's actually the sewer system. So this photo was taken sometime around 1927. The sewer line was installed on the north bank of the Broad River. The dam was built on top of it. The lake was filled up, and thus you have a subaqueous sewer system or a submerged gravity sewer system. It ranges in depth between 4 feet and 105 feet. There's approximately 14 miles or 74,000 linear feet of cast iron pipe. You do have a seasonal population, so your full-time population is around 1,200, and it serves both public and private. So you have Rumbling Bald and the Rutherford County line that serves Chimney Rock Village. It was installed in a number of different ways. One of the ways was on wood cribbing. It was also installed buried under what would become the lake bed. We believe most of the installation was like the third photo here, which is basically laid on top of the ground with concrete collars over each joint. So what we have it installed along the existing grade, ranges in size between 8 inches and 18 inches, contains various bins and submerged junction boxes. The perimeter manholes that you see around the edge of the lake, those feed into this system that's under the lake. We know where the manholes are around the lake, obviously. We have to make guesses about where the system is under the lake. So we don't know exactly where that system is. Your treatment plant, prior to 1969, it simply just discharged into the Broad River. After the Clean Water Act, a biological plant was built, almost immediately began suffering problems from the lake infiltration, or the lake water that's getting in the sewer and diluting it to the point that it's very difficult to treat. In 91, that came to a head and the plant was converted to a different process, a physical chemical process, so your plant behaves more like the front end of a water treatment plant than it does a biological wastewater treatment plant. The plant has suffered from numerous notice of violations that deal with the flow rate, that deal with ammonia discharge, and deal with total suspended solids. And the thing to realize about your current treatment process, the process put in place in 91, it cannot meet its current limits. So it's not a matter of running the plant differently or running the plant better. It physically cannot remove ammonia, so it cannot meet its NPDES limits. Some recent projects that the town has undertaken to stem the tide. The first one in 2007 was an inspection and smoke testing, where they inspected manholes, they closed circuit televisions, as much of the sewer line as they could. They were limited to about 14%, and a lot of that is because of those bins and junction boxes that I mentioned. The fact that the system is almost exclusively inaccessible. Divers did find leaks in the submerged joints, which led to the 2009 pipe rep project. Both these two previous projects were very successful. I'll show you a slide in a minute. And they reduced the amount of infiltration in the lake. The pipe rep project has a 15-year service life. It was done in 2009. So 2024 is the end of its expected service life. Very recently, an emergency shutoff valve was installed behind the dam. What this would do is actually cut off the sewer flow going to the treatment plant. And this would be used in the event of a failure of the line underneath the lake. The imagery, if you would imagine a bathtub that's 90 feet deep and you pull the plug, that's what would happen. If this happened, there would be a no flush order, meaning that you could not introduce new sewage to the system, shutting down your kitchens and bathrooms, etc. The problem being that right now the lake water is getting in the sewer. If the line broke and we close this valve, the sewer could get into the lake water. So here's a picture. This is about 300 feet upstream of the dam. You can see the deterioration and the corrosion. Your subaqueous sewer system is non-compliant. You have a long history of violations. It's been identified by the EPA as problematic. It's at risk of a complete failure. The pipes are deteriorating. It's nearly 100 years old. And again, a failure would result in a no flush order. Your wastewater treatment plant is also non-compliant for the reasons I've mentioned. With a long history of violations and fines, it simply cannot meet the current limits. And the primary reason, again, is lake infiltration. Some other conditions are the laterals that you see around the lake, especially when the lake is pulled down. They're installed below the water line. They're installed under structures. They're subject to leaks caused by damage to the lines. And you have a large number of submerged joints. And any of these joints can be sources of lake water getting into the sewer system. So again, the primary issue facing the sewer system and the wastewater plant is lake infiltration. This is the graph that I mentioned. So what this is the volume of wastewater that comes into the plant each day from 1994 to present. What you can see is that it was significantly higher in the past. And the reason for that is the 2007 joint repair. So that was repairing a joint that was leaking, and you see how significant an effect that had, along with the 2009 joint wrap project. But what you see as the pipes continue to age and the joint wrap continues to age is the flow is starting to creep back up, and it will continue to do so. So what are our objectives? Primarily, it's regulatory compliance, it's protection against catastrophic failure, it's providing a sustainable and enduring collection and treatment system, a solution that's financially viable for the town, that gives access for operations and maintenance. One of the key issues with your existing system is not necessarily that it's underwater. It's that you can't access it. We can't put a camera in it. We can't look in it. We don't really even know where it is. We want to incorporate future growth, reduce inflow and infiltration, and provide a long service life. So we're looking at a 100-year solution. So the proposed solution would be a perimeter system, and this would be installed around the perimeter of the lake, the north and south shore. It would consist of HDPE or high density polyethylene pipe and HDPE manholes with pump stations with laterals. This system, instead of having a typical mechanical joint, would be a fused joint, which would eliminate a lot of the potential for leaks. We would, as part of the first phase, rehab some of the existing manholes. This would help just alleviate some of the flow problems at the plant and assist in treatment. The phase one would begin at the dam, and we'd work our way around the north and south shore. Because of funding issues, we can't do the entire project in the first phase, but we have a strategic reason for this. So as we start at the dam and work our way around, as we come past properties and those properties tie into the new system, they would be pulled off the old system and thus wouldn't have the risks associated with being on the existing system. So that if in the future you're tied into the new system, there is a failure, there is a new flush order, you would not be subjected to it because you're on the new system. So where would it go? This is what we're calling the backshore area. So you've all seen the lake when they draw the lake down and it exposes a shoreline. That is a prime place for installing the new infrastructure. And this is what it would look like. So you would have an HDPE line that runs through the backshore area. And then you have a stub out for a lateral that would go up above the lake. The yellow that you see is a permanent easement that would be acquired, and that would be a tie-in point for a property owner. So they would tie in out of the lake above the water line. The benefit here would be is that we would have manholes. So the line would be accessible to the public works staff. You could also lower the lake and access the entire sewer line itself, and you would no longer have those existing manholes around the perimeter or those private laterals that run below the lake level. We looked at a number of different systems. We've ironed it down to three primary systems and one rehab. So the manhole rehabilitation would be a part of each individual system. The first is a backshore low pressure system. So again, that's a low pressure system that's installed in the backshore. The second would be a backshore series pump station, and the third would be a backshore HDP gravity lift system. It's important to note each of these alternatives are taking place in the backshore. That is truly the best place to put the replacement system. This is what they would look like. So this is a HDPE manhole, and it has a concrete collar, and the collar serves two purposes. The first is ballast to prevent the manhole from floating because it will be watertight. The second is it offers a amount of protection for the manhole itself. The pump station would be exactly the same way. It would be an HDPE pump station with concrete collars that would provide ballast and protection. The project, we're looking at three different phases. We're looking at three different steps. We're looking at a short-term, mid-term, and long-term. So short-term is what's called a special order of consent. It's a legal agreement between Lake Lure and the NCDEQ, and it would protect against additional fines and penalties, protect it from further regulatory involvement against third-party litigation. It's important to note this is a short-term, and it would not reduce the risk of an SASS failure. The midterm solution is the manhole rehabilitation. And what this would do, it would extend the service life of the existing system. It would remove potentially hundreds of thousands of gallons of lake water that enters the system every day. But to note, it would not reduce the risk of a failure of the submerged pipes. An important component of this system is what we're calling a sewer access valve or a reservoir drain. It does double duty. From the sewer system, this would allow us to lower the lake below the current maximum or minimum water level. So below the spillway, we're down to approximately 20 feet. And what this would do would give us an extra construction area for the system, and it would also help dewater the area. In terms of an emergency response, it would give us an insurance policy to help with a catastrophic SASS failure. And it would also could be used if you had some sort of damage or an imminent dam failure. The long-term solution is to replace the existing system. This would provide areas that are not currently accessed or difficult to access. It would simplify the connection effort because you would be making your tie-ins at your property line in front of the homes. It would eliminate the risk associated with the submerged piping, and it would assist the public works with operations and maintenance, make that accessible, and they would be able to complete it year round. With the schedule, what we're looking at this winter in January is bringing the lake down, and that would enable us to do a number of things. We're looking at doing RFEOI, which is where we bring contractors out who would be interested in bidding the project so they can see the project location, see what we're trying to build. Obviously, right now, the project area is underwater. And so you can imagine a contractor would have some difficulty in bidding a project that he can't look at. We are also going to do some additional geotechnical work and surveying with a plan toward beginning construction or phase one in 2021, 2022, or winter of those years. This project will require community involvement. One of the big things is lake use. With the lake down 20 feet, the lake would be restricted during the construction period. There will be equipment on barges that will be on the lake. There will be pipe that's floated out in the lake as part of the construction process. In addition, once the new system is in, it's going to be running through the backshore. And so new lake construction, we'd have to take steps to ensure that the new pipe is protected. There will be easements that are required. These are temporary easements for personnel and machine and materials and construction, and then permanent easements for the laterals that I showed you earlier, for electrical connections and for generator connections. With that, I'd like to thank you and look forward to answering any questions at the end of the presentations. Thank you again.
Thank you, Reese. And now what we'd like to do is give the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, who oversees the options that you have been looking at and that Reese has presented to you, And we have with us today Mr. Landon Davidson, who is the Asheville Regional Office Supervisor for DEQ. And we're thankful to have him here today. He's been here at all sessions. We also have on Zoom Kristen Furtenball. She is an engineer with the Municipal Permitting Unit, and it's a division of water resources under the Department of Environmental Quality. She can provide some input over chat. Unfortunately, she can't speak, but we'll give her opportunity if she's listening in. If she wants to offer some comment, she can do that through chat, and Mitchell will pick that up and provide that to me. Mitchell is right here. So Mr. Davidson, if you will provide your comments, please.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for coming out tonight. This is a very big project, as you'll soon see. If you live here, which you probably do because your interest, you know that it's a unique destination. I'm very proud of that. You should be. I live in Black Mountain. We come over here. So my agency is a regulatory agency that oversees protection of groundwater and water resources. So we oversee discharge of wastewater treatment plants, coal ash, animals for the 19 western counties. I am that person that signs and assesses the fines that they have referenced and the violations. Also the person that speaks with EPA. The EPA is always interested in Lake Lure. We meet annually. They look at some of our more non-compliant sites. And obviously this is one of them, chronically non-compliant for the reasons that have been pointed out. I have been familiar with Lake Lure, at least in the MPDS, that's the discharge part of it, and the collection system since about 2013. So I present myself today to tell you that I'm the person that is responsible for the compliance aspect and motivating that and moving it along. I'm also, on the other hand, a person that is completely trying to be engaged in this process and collaborating. You should be very proud of where you are and where the town is right now. These types of public meetings with this level of engagement and networking is a rare thing. Infrastructure degradation across the country is happening. It's happening in North Carolina at many locations and wastewater plants. The problem you have here is that you can't just drive out to your the pipe that's falling apart and replace it, you know, piece by piece like some municipalities are. You've got a much more complex and unique system. And when you have complex and unique, that often translates to a higher cost. It's a legacy problem. Infrastructure in general and wastewater investment is not something that's fun to talk about. It doesn't easily get people excited and, yeah, where can I put my money into it? It's critically important though. You have this town that relies on the presence of the dam, obviously, and without a collection system and without a wastewater plant, you cannot have a residence on the lake. So clearly it's all tied together. They've already talked about that. There have been some prescriptions or attempts in the past, and our agency has also supported some of those. This process that you're currently going to hear about, and I've been in this office since 2000, is the most holistic approach that engages all the different pieces. And unlike everyone else, all your pieces, as shown on the slide, are tied together. So we often don't get to pick the situations that we have to deal with in life. This is a legacy issue, but the time has arrived now to where it has to be addressed. As they'll talk about, the infrastructure is just at a point where it's degrading, and the risk with the dam and also the risk with failure potential of the collection system is continuing to get higher. So I would just encourage you to continue to be engaged as you are in this process now. Ask questions. For this to really move forward for your community, it will need community engagement. So there will need to be cooperation. And I'm going to go even further out on a limb and tell you that I believe right now you have the best team that you can have. And that goes as far as your local government. And I always say, I don't know any of these folks personally, but you've got the right team because they've asked the right questions. They've pulled back from other potential fixes, and they are honed in on what I believe will be the fix for Lake Lure. So you have the right team internally in your government, and you have the right consultants because, again, it's a really complex solutions that we're talking about. This is not your normal collection system, pipe repair, wastewater treatment plant, rehab, okay? So with that, that's all I had to offer, except that my agency will continue to assist and collaborate as much as we can to support your town and to support what I hope is eventually a positive outcome on the other end, because there really are no other options at this point. If you want to secure the future of the town and this great lake, now is the time to seize the inertia that you see with the consultants and with the right people in the right places. So again, thank you for coming out, and I'd continue to ask you to be engaged as the process moves along. It's going to be multi-year. I have been sticking around for the question part, but I can't. I have to be in Raleigh tomorrow. I'll leave my card here. It's got my email on it, and all these folks have my email too. You're welcome to email directly any questions to me about the sewer system or the wastewater treatment plant, and I'll get those answers right back to you. So again, thank you for your time.
Mr. Davidson, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your comments. I will now, through Zoom, see if there is any additional comments that Kristen Furtenbaum, the engineer with the Municipal Permitting Union, would like to submit. She is important because she is a fundamental engineer with the DEQ in Raleigh that is involved in permitting the options that we're considering. So Mitchell, do you have any comments from Ms. Furtenbaum?
Yes.
You do, okay.
We did have one further comment out of the main permitting office in Raleigh that I think echoes what you had to say, and that was that, let's see if we bring it up. But in essence, the central office looks forward to working with Lake Lure and their engineers, the Asheville Regional Office, and the Division of Water Infrastructure to keep these projects moving forward amidst a very unique set of circumstances faced by the town. I think that's a good positive outlook from the division to be taking that kind of an attitude to work with. And they also commend everyone for the efforts that they've put forward so far. And I think that's a positive message and echoes what you're saying as well.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments, Ms. Furtenbaum. And now we'd like to turn to Jonathan Pittman with Schnabel Engineering for his presentation regarding the options on the dam.
All right, good evening, everyone. I just want to share a little bit about the work we've done over the last couple of years to look at options to make some repairs to the dam to address some state dam safety requirements, among other things. And just first, briefly, this is to give you a little background. This is an aerial of the dam, obviously looking from the lake downstream. And you know, this dam, like the sewer system, is nearly 100 years old. So it's been infrastructure that's been in place for quite some time, and certainly can't expect to have a much longer service life without, you know, major upgrades or repairs. So this layout here, I'll reference this a little bit. You see on the slide, those bays are numbered 1 through 13, looking your left to right there. And you know, this is a very, you've heard the term already this evening, but it's a very unique dam. It's a complex structure. And those bays 4 through 13 are what's called an arch buttress dam. And I don't have time tonight to kind of go into the details of that, but it was a technology, a really neat technology, and it really an engineering marvel in its time that was developed primarily because when this dam was constructed, you know, labor was very cheap and materials were quite expensive. So it's not a whole lot of concrete in that mass. It's a relatively thin structure that uses the weight of water to stay in place, essentially. So that's bays 4 through 13, which make up the majority of the dam. Then to the left of that, you see bays 1 through 3, and that's the gated spillway section, or what I'll also refer to as the concrete gravity section of the dam. And that's where you pass normal flood flows. When you get a rainstorm, you pass them through those gates. So this dam is regulated by the state of North Carolina. And there's different classifications for dams in the state, but this dam is considered a very large high hazard dam. And the very large, refers to the size of the structure. It's over 100 feet tall. It's about 125 feet at its maximum point. And it obviously impounds a large volume of water. The high hazard piece of that classification refers to, in the event of a failure of a dam, what would the consequences be? So what high hazard means is if the dam were to fail, suddenly there would likely be loss of life downstream. And George Eller will talk a little bit about this a little bit later on. But because of that, there's different classifications. A very large high hazard dam has the most stringent requirements that a dam must meet in the state of North Carolina. And I'll talk a little bit about those. So in 2018, the state requested some additional information from the town, and the town brought Schnabel in to assist with that and to further evaluate the existing condition of the dam. And certainly the dam, like I said, nearly 100 years old. Overall, it's in fair condition considering its age. It's performed remarkably well over its service life. It's done what it was intended to do, what it was designed to do, and it's done it fairly effectively. But as I mentioned, it's nearly 100-year-old infrastructure. It can't be expected to continue to perform well without significant repairs or other things. And we identified several items that need repairs, ongoing maintenance and that sort of thing. On top of that, the dam has to meet certain criteria, like I mentioned, and that criteria is based on that size and hazard classification. And really, North Carolina dam safety laws really didn't come into effect nationally until the late 1960s. So this dam was built well before those standards, and those standards have been updated since they came into effect based on, things we've learned, better guidance, better science, and they continue to evolve with time and get better. But because of that, this dam, like many others that were built at its time, don't meet current criteria across the board. And specifically for Lake Lure Dam, I've listed here kind of the main components where it does not meet current dam safety criteria. One of those is hydraulic capacity. Because it's such a high hazard dam, and again, these regulations are driven by public safety. That's the purpose behind the dam safety laws, is to protect the public downstream. So you're trying to protect them from what are really likely very infrequent events that hopefully will never happen. But that's the point, is you want to keep the public safe downstream. So you're designing for a very large storm event, rainfall event. You're talking about 36 inches of rainfall in 24 hours. So that's what's called the probable maximum precipitation, theoretically the greatest amount of rainfall you could have in this area. And this dam doesn't have enough capacity to pass that storm safely without overtopping and going over each side of the dam. It has about 2/3 of the required capacity. These dams, I mentioned they're very unique structures. I also mentioned they're relatively thin structures, and they're relatively weak in what's called the cross canyon direction. So across the canyon, left to right. And they're especially weak when they're subject to seismic loading. So in the event you were to have a very large earthquake in this region, the dam would likely or could suffer significant deformations and potentially failure. A couple other items here that I mentioned, the gravity sections where the gated spillway are, those don't meet all of the stability requirements they're required to meet. So there's some potential instability there under certain flood loading conditions, large flood loading conditions. And then Reese talked to you a bit about the sewer access valve, also referred to as the reservoir drain. And in the dam safety world, I'm going to refer to it as the reservoir drain, but they're the same thing for this discussion. So dam safety requires that the town have the ability, all high hazard dams have the ability to completely drain the reservoir in the event of an emergency, or nearly drain the reservoir. And right now the town only has the ability to drain the lake about 12 feet using the spillway gates. So there's a need to be able to drain the lake to a much lower depth in the event of an emergency. And I'll talk more about the reservoir drain in a few minutes. So to look at those, we have those criteria. We know I'm going to refer to them as deficiencies for this conversation. We need to address those deficiencies, address dam safety requirements. So we looked at alternatives to do that. As a part of that, we also had several other objectives to look at options to address those items. And one of those is extending the service life of the dam significantly. You don't want to invest a lot of money in the structure if you're not going to be able to get a much longer life out of it. Also, not modifying lake levels. You don't want to modify, you want to keep the for permanent purposes. You want to keep the permanent normal pool of the lake where it is. And you also don't want to increase the potential for upstream or downstream flooding significantly. I've listed everything here and you have these notes. There's several other things we did consider when evaluating options. And one of them was, obviously minimizing impacts to the community to the extent possible during construction of any rehabilitation project and following construction. So from a dam rehabilitation standpoint, we looked at multiple options to address those items. I'm only presenting the one here that we feel kind of the recommended rehabilitation alternative. And these items address the main body of the dam and to meet those dam safety requirements I already mentioned. So to meet hydraulic capacity, we need to pass more water through that dam. So how do you do that? Well, one, we would improve the efficiency of the crest where the water flows over the top of that arch or the weir. We would improve the efficiency hydraulically by changing the shape of that. We would also lower those arch elevations, so take them closer to the normal pool elevation of the lake so we can pass more water over them before it goes over the sides of the dam. From a seismic stability standpoint, there are really two options to address seismic stability. One is to add bracing in between those arch bays. The other is to fill those arch bays in with concrete. And essentially what you see in the bottom right there is that geometry. You infill each of those arches with mass concrete and you essentially turn the dam into a concrete gravity dam, similar to what you have now at the gated spillway sections at bays 1 through 3. And then at those gated spillway sections in bays 1 through 3, what you would do to address the stability conditions I mentioned before was drill anchors through the concrete, tie those anchors into rock, and essentially just ratchet that concrete down into the underlying bedrock to prevent it from potentially sliding. And then this project would include the reservoir drain installation as well, which I'll touch on in a minute. So here's just a graphic. You could probably maybe be able to see it better in your handout. But the green you see there is essentially that's the infilling of those arch bays with concrete. So you infill those with concrete, then you have that curved shape at the top. That's what's called an OG weir, and that improves the hydraulics and allows you to pass more flow over the dam safely. So I'm not going to go through all of each of these components, but one thing to point out is that discussion we just had was focused on really the main body of the dam, but there are a lot of other components to the dam itself and a lot of other related infrastructure components that tie into the dam but are not directly a part of the dam. And so those items need to be addressed as well as a part of a major rehabilitation project. For example, the intake tower in the lake, that's nearly 100 years old as well. That wasn't designed for today's criteria. I will skip down to the bottom here, the DOT bridge. Obviously, there's a bridge that runs across the top of the dam. Town council right now is in discussions with North Carolina DOT about the best path forward for that structure and working with them to come up with a solution that fits with the dam project. So the main focus of our study was on rehabilitation options for the dam, but we also did consider full replacement of that. And what does that look like? Well, that would include building a new concrete structure immediately downstream of the existing dam and essentially demolishing the existing dam, or the majority of it. It would be anything that's left would be well underwater at the lake. And this, obviously, there's some advantages to this option. There's some disadvantages as well, which I'll touch on. One thing to address here is this would require new construction for hydroelectric facilities as well. And right now, I mentioned the existing dam has hydroelectric, but that was grandfathered in and not regulated. Most hydroelectric across the country is regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. And Lake Lower Dam is not currently regulated by FERC. It was grandfathered in. But if you built a new dam with new hydroelectric, it would fall under FERC's jurisdiction. So there are several other advantages and disadvantages here, but I'll go over those on the next slide. So here's an overall comparison of kind of rehabilitation versus replacement. We looked at options that both have extended service life. The rehabilitation is a major project. It's not, this is a very challenging dam to address those dam safety requirements, and there's no kind of simple quick fix to do that. It involves a major rehabilitation and major modifications to the structure. So what you get when you make those major modifications is you do get a pretty healthy extended service life for that existing dam. For a replacement dam, you get an even longer service life. I put 100 plus years on here. It could last 150 more if it's maintained well and other things. Certainly as part of this, there are multiple factors to consider as a part of the decision, whether it's rehabilitation or replacement. Again, the existing infrastructure, you can't just, back to this holistic approach, you can't just look at the dam in one box and make a decision there. There's a lot of other related components, the bridge, the sewer, the lake itself and what goes on there. So all those things need to be considered in the selection of the best alternative for the dam. Certainly lake levels is one thing for a rehabilitation project. You would likely have to draw the lake down significantly for a period of time to do work on the intake tower and maybe the dam itself, whereas a replacement would not require a significant drawdown of the lake to construct. So you see there obviously you can phase a rehabilitation project more, so you could do it in a few different phases potentially. That may increase cost, but there's a little more flexibility there in terms of schedule. You can see the costs down at the bottom overall are fairly similar in terms of estimated total project cost. You're looking at $60 to $65 million to rehabilitate for a major rehabilitation or replacement of that dam. So a significant cost there. And obviously I've listed a couple other costs that apply and for a bridge to go back, and then to add new hydro back to a dam replacement, that would be on top of that 60 to 65. So the reservoir drain, I've talked a little bit about that. The town is moving forward with that project. It addresses multiple requirements. As Reese mentioned, it allows the sewer work and critical sewer repairs to proceed. It benefits lake dredging, allows that to be more efficient and potentially reduce costs. And it also meets the dam safety requirements. So that work would be done as a separate phase and installed at the base of one of the arches and bays now. And so the town is taking steps to obtain funding through a grant from FEMA and some others to move forward with that work to address the dam safety requirement and benefit several other infrastructure components. So I've mentioned that top moving forward with the reservoir drain as the initial phase. Kind of the next steps for the dam ultimately are to decide which direction to go in terms of rehabilitation or replacement. And then there's just a tremendous amount. This is one piece of it, but there's a tremendous amount of stakeholders involved in this project. I've kind of mentioned that, but a lot of coordination with those stakeholders is required, kind of moving forward and determining the most appropriate path forward for the dam. I believe that's it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate your presentation. And now we'd like to call on Mr. George Eller. He is the state dam safety engineer. He would be responsible for permitting and overview of the alternatives that you have seen. And now, Mr. Eller, if you would offer your comments, please.
Hi, I'm George Eller. I'm your state dam safety engineer for North Carolina. The state dam safety, even though we're part of DEQ, much of our work is in public safety. We do work a lot with environmental emergency management out of the Department of Public Safety. And our main objective is the health and safety of the public, keeping people safe from dams and making sure that the dams are safe. This dam is a fairly large dam, as Jonathan said, 125 feet tall. It impounds 45,000 acre feet of water. That's a lot of water. It is a high hazard dam. High hazard meaning that if the dam should fail for whatever reason, people are likely to die. there's quite a few people in the valley below the dam. There are houses, roads, other infrastructure, utilities, things that would flood in the event that the dam failed. The population at risk is estimated to be in the hundreds of people that would be likely to perish if the dam failed. The inundation zone that was obtained as a part of your emergency action plan, which is required, and the town does have one, thank you very much. It stretches across 4 counties and even down into South Carolina. So there's quite a few people who would be in harm's way if the dam were to fail. For that reason, and because of the condition of the dam, we consider it to be a fairly high risk as well. Risk being the product of the consequences of failure and the likelihood of failure. So for that reason, we have asked the town to have an engineer to take a look at the dam. As far back as 2006, we started to notice things in our annual inspection or semi-annual inspections that the dam was starting to have issues, small issues, and we noted that there hadn't been a real an engineering evaluation of it that anybody could find, at least in recent years. And so we asked the town to take a look at it, have an engineer to take a look at it and did an evaluation, and they did. And that's kind of how we got where we are now. Dam safety did not take the dam into a formal enforcement process because the town is doing what needed to be done. Without that, and the town, we feel like the town has stepped up and is taking proactive stance to get the dam into condition that it needs to be in. Because the dam's size, it has to be held to a certain standard of safety. The Dam Safety Law of 1967 sets aside certain standards for dams, and it varies depending on how big the dam is and what the consequences are. And so this dam is in one of the highest categories that has to be held to basically the highest standard that we have. That having been said, the original design was pretty amazing with those thin concrete shells. Considering what they had to work with in the 1920s, the slide rules and nomographs, they did a pretty good job designing it, and it's held up for 93 years, but it is 93 years old. So it's a product of its time, and the hazard has gone up since it was originally constructed. There weren't that many people living in the valley below it, and it started to get a little bit of problems. I'm nowhere near 93 years old, but I'm starting to get a little bit deficient myself here and there, so I know how it feels. We were trying to work with the town collaboratively. We arranged to get $80,000 through FEMA to help the town defray costs associated with the engineering for the dam improvements for the fiscal year that is just ending now. We should be having that to you guys here pretty soon. We're also applying again next year for a little bit more money, maybe $120,000 is what we're going to ask for Lake Lure for the next fiscal year, which we just put the paperwork in last week for that. And so we're going to try to get you guys some more money. And then there's going to be a third year as well. So we'll see what happens in the fiscal year after that. So there should be some additional funds coming in that third year as well. So we're working with the town to try to get you guys some funds to work with. I see you're in a kind of a tight situation. You have a small population and a big need. So we're trying to work with the town to get you some funds and try to work with you as far as timelines and things like that. So we think that you're in good hands and that you're doing what needs to be done. And we're looking forward to working with the town to continue that.
Thank you, Mr. Eller. Appreciate your comments. And now I'm going to focus our attention on dredging. Without, there is no lure to the town without the lake. And if you don't get the silt out of the lake, you will have no lake. And so here's some quick facts for you. It's in your brochure. I won't belabor them. You can read them at your leisure, but I'll point out the area is quite large, 94 square miles. And your elevation is significant, a 3,000 foot differential with the highest at 4,000, the lowest around 1,000. What that means is when it rains, the water droplets get pretty quick down to the lake. This isn't like rainfall at the beach and it just hits a flat level and it just sits there and perks into the soil. The other thing is that the soils up in this area, they have a nickname of sugar soils. They tend to solubilize quickly. So when you have this heavy rainfall and the runoff comes down very quickly, you have a lot of logging trails, you have borrow pit areas, you have old construction sites that are exposed without sedimentation control around them. And so you have denuded areas, and this rainwater that rushes across there dissolves those soils pretty quickly, solubilizes them, and they're easy to move. As soon as it hits the lakes, boom, the movement slows down, and you get sediment drop right there at the mouth or right quickly as the tributaries enter into the lake. So the town has to do something about that to keep the lake usable. Give you an idea of the size of that. There's 40,000 tons per year. This is per year now, 40,000 tons. To give you a feel for 40,000 tons, some of you may have visited the USS North Carolina in Wilmington, the World War II battleship. That weighs 35,000 tons. Another idea is the 33,000 cubic yards that represents. That's enough silt to fill this entire gymnasium that you're sitting in 3 times. That's per year. So that's quite a challenge for the town to get that silt out. The problem is staying ahead of the curve on that. Here's your drainage area. It's quite large. Has 3 unincorporated communities plus your town and Chimney Rock. Discharge into it, covers 4 counties, Buncombe, Henderson, Rutherford, and a portion of McDowell. And so this is a big challenge to deal with this. Here's a picture of runoff during a very heavy, significant rain event. That's Broad River rushing into Lake Lure. Also, you see there a method of dredging. That's a floated barge, a dredger on a barge. That really doesn't remove a lot of silt, but you still have to do it. And here's some of the money that the town has spent over the last 10 years. They spent about $2 million, averages about $185,000 per year. And they're not being able to get ahead of the curve. It's catching up to them, or it's exceeding beyond them. They have to catch up to this. They have to get this silt out. So the town is planning on spending in the future about $425,000 per year to get that 40,000, not only the 40,000 tons, but to get ahead of the curve because it's still catching up. So this is a big challenge for Mr. Dean Givens and the town staff to address this, and this is what your town is currently doing. And that's just part of this whole cycle, the dam rehab, the hydroelectric facility, maintaining that so it can continue to provide revenue through the sale of electricity to Duke Energy. Your sewer system, your subaqueous sewer system, and dredging. And so the town did retain a consultant to take a look at all the financial aspects of all of this and give recommendations on revenue streams for that. And that was Withers Ravenel, and Mr. Seth Robertson is here to make his presentation on the financial aspects of all this.
Thank you, Kurt. Good evening. So we've been talking about a lot of challenges for the last hour or so now. And as important it is to make sure we get the right technical solutions for all of these challenges, it's equally important that we have the right funding and finance solution as well. Doesn't matter how good the engineering is, and I think we have some good engineering going on here, trying to really look at all the different options and the best way to do things, but it doesn't matter how good it is if we can't afford to pay for it. Much like Landon talked about, I have a professional and a personal interest at this point in my life in this project. Before I joined Withers Ravenel as Director of Funding and Asset Management, I worked a little over 13 years for DEQ, Division of Water Infrastructure, managing the State Revolving Fund Program, which is where the funding has come historically to pay for this type of work for wastewater infrastructure and for Lake Lure. While I was there, we provided the funding for the pipe wrapping project, and I was there managing the program when we agreed to fund the first phase of the sewer project. So I've been involved not just the year that we've been working consulting on this with Withers Ravenel, but now since at least 2008, 2009, and trying to come up with a long-term solution for what is a very, very unique situation. So our role is basically to come in and take a look at all the finances for the town, to look at all the different funds. And when I'm talking about funds, to kind of simplify that, basically the different types of accounts that the town manages to pay for different things. And I'll talk about what those are in a second. But basically, we've looked at what's called the general fund, the electric fund, and the water and sewer fund to come up with a long-term plan to meet all of these needs and everything else that the town does. The town doesn't just do wastewater. It doesn't just build a dam. There's a lot of things the town does to provide services to its citizens, and they all go together. Obviously, we're here because of the challenge of this infrastructure. We're talking about at least $100 million worth of infrastructure needs just into the wastewater and the dam. That's a big number. That's a big number for any town. It's a really big number for a small town, and to try to deal with it kind of all at once. And they're very integrally related, as we've talked about today. They all go together, and you can't touch one without it affecting everything else. So we have to have a comprehensive plan that takes into account all those pieces and how you pay for it all. And that has to be looked at the same time. So over the last year, we've been working with council, we've been working with staff to come up with the 10-year financial plan that involves all three of the primary funds to look at how we meet those short-term and long-term needs. How do we look to reduce costs where we can reduce costs? How do we look to increase revenues in the places where we have to increase revenues? And basically to try to provide the information to the council so that they can make informed, hard decisions. This is not easy. It's not easy to make generational decisions. And that's what this infrastructure is. You know, with any luck, a lot of this infrastructure is going to outlive me, and it's going to outlive you and our children, and maybe even our children's children. So it's an opportunity to do it right and to have a good measured approach to get to where we need to be. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about how you can pay for infrastructure given the way accounting works and the options within a town's budget. And basically there's two different kind of pots of money and two different types of fund. The first is general fund. And the general fund pays for most of what the town does. And the revenue for the general fund is taxes. That's what comes into that, and that's what pays for everything that's in a general fund for the most part. There's fees and some other things, but it's almost, for the most part, taxes. And in order to pay for infrastructure through the general fund, and the dam is considered infrastructure that would be under the general fund, basically you have to borrow money for the most part. So that's what you're going to do to pay for large capital projects. If they're small, you can do existing reserves, but otherwise you're going to use state and federal funding programs like USDA, like perhaps FEMA programs, if you can get grant type money in addition to that, or you're going to go to the bond market, where basically you go to the market and people buy a bond from you and you're paying them interest, and you're backing that with, it's called general obligation bond. You're backing it with your ability to tax and your future tax incomes. The other option is what's called enterprise funds. And in an enterprise fund, like for water and sewer, the way they're structured is they're paid entirely by the fees that are collected. They're self-supporting. So taxes don't generally go for that. It's all paid for by fees. And in order to pay for large infrastructure projects through there, it's kind of the same thing. You may can get some grants, some special appropriations, and that's being worked on. There's not $100 million worth of grant money out there. But there's $1 million here, and there's $1 million there, and there's a couple $1 million here, and every bit matters. But ultimately, to pay for projects like what we're talking about, there generally is going to be some type of loan that you're going to take out. And right now you already have some loan. We'll talk about what we have already. But basically it's going to be the state and federal financing programs, like the state revolving fund, USDA, CDBG type programs, or you're going to do revenue bonds similar to general obligation. You're going to go to the bond market and you're going to pledge the income from your revenues for your rates for ever so many years to pay things back. And that's really the only options you have as a town to pay for large infrastructure projects. So what are the challenges? And we've talked about these already for the most part. The dam by itself and needing to replace that, and given the size of the town and the size of the project, is a unique challenge by itself. To have to replace a sewer system that is one of a kind in the state is a large project and unique by itself. And when you combine them together, no one else has this situation to deal with. And then the town has a very small population in comparison to the infrastructure needs that it has. Like I said, there's not a lot of grant money that's out there. The days of lots of free money available for infrastructure largely went away 5, 10, 15 years ago and have really been declining probably since the 80s. So there's not a lot of grant money to just get free money to do this. Makes it necessary for the town to finance these projects. And in order to do that, you end up having to do some increases in taxes, fees, and rates, trying to offset that as much as possible with other reductions where you can, and also trying to phase projects to try to make sure you're doing the right project at the right time and that you can spread it out over time. Because we all know we can't do $100 million worth of projects this year or in the next 5 years or probably in the next 10 years. So it's trying to figure out the right phase to do everything, to spread that out over a manageable amount of time so you can pay for it. And in order to get yourself in position to make sure you can take on any necessary debt to pay for some of these things, you also have to make sure the town's in a very strong financial condition, just like making sure all your accounts in order if you're going to go get a mortgage so that your credit score is in a good place to go borrow money. The town has to be in that same situation. All the accounts have to be in a place where everything's very strong, in a great position when we go to the borrowing agencies to say, we need to borrow money to do this work. So the first steps. So this is where we're at today. The town currently has $12.5 million of 0% interest loan money to complete phase 1 of the wastewater improvements, with the goal being to get as much bang for the buck as possible out of phase 1, do as much as we can, and to get the town as in compliance as possible with phase 1. And then work on a long-term plan for future phases to accomplish the big picture, to get where you eventually want to be, but the understanding being that let's do what you can now and come up with a long-term strategy to get where you want to go. The town recently increased water and sewer rates by 30%, and that 30% increase is solely tied to maintaining adequate reserves and paying the debt service on the $12.5 million. So there's an annual bill essentially goes along with that, and that's how the rates were set, was to pay that bill every year when it comes due when this work is complete, and getting everything in position to be able to do so. That equates to about $13 a month for the average water bill, about $20 a month for the average sewer bill. And I can tell you it wasn't entered into lightly. There was a ton of discussion, there was a lot of planning, and an attempt to make sure that anywhere costs could be cut to try to limit the amount of increases that had to be put in place now, it was done. In addition, the town needs to increase the tax rate by 6 cents. That will allow to cover some of the increased dredging costs and to, again, to make sure all the funds are in place and to start getting ready for the possibility of taking on additional debt for the dam project when that comes time. So to get everything in position so everything's ready to go when we get there. Give you an example, the 6 cents increase, basically for a $200,000 home, your tax bill is going to go up $120 a year. $250,000 home, $150 a year. Next steps. Town's going to continue to evaluate opportunities to reduce the existing costs and to phase additional work to minimize financial impacts, with the understanding that no decision can be made about the right infrastructure project without understanding the financial impacts and how it's going to be paid for. The town's going to continue to pursue subsidized state and federal funds to reduce the cost to citizens. Any grant that's out there the best loans that are out there, whatever the best funding is, to try to go out there and make sure it's the best package available to lessen the burden as much as possible. And to pursue all other options to cover the remaining $87.5 million gap in funding. Said we have $12.5 million now, at least $87.5 million more in funding is going to need to be secured at some point to be able to meet all the needs that we've talked about here today. And in order to talk about some of the other options that the town's looking to try to investigate to get additional support and assistance in obtaining that funding, I'm going to turn it over now to Steve with the policy group for him to talk about their role.
Central Heights, it's not lost on me that they got down to saying we need to raise $87 million and he called on me. So, let me see if I can get my slide up here. There we go. Well, thank you. It's been a long day, but it's been a fruitful day. And we have learned a lot. I know I have learned a lot, and that has been my major goal today, was to educate myself as to the needs of the town and where we go from here. I just have one slide you have in front of you, and I don't have a whole set of recommendations to make to you. I'm working on that, and then we will talk about how I want to approach that shortly. But first, let me just say thanks to the mayor and the commission and staff and to everyone. And our colleagues on stage, all the folks. And it's also really good to know that we have, with this group today, the regulatory agencies and the folks who do oversight to work with everyone. And it's in a really collegiate manner, and it's really interesting to see. I do want to come back. Senator Heights, thank you for being here. I know it's a long way to Spruce Pine, and you have a bride and twin boys up there that you need to get back to, but we really appreciate you coming here. Senator Heights has been a friend of Western North Carolina, and I really appreciate his service and his friendship. What I'd like to do is to tell you a little bit about the policy, as you see in front of you. I'll talk about the policy group, and just so you'll have, and then a little bit about how we approach this whole issue. I started the policy group in about 16 years ago, 2004, when I left the General Assembly. I was a member of the Senate. We are a public policy consulting firm. We work with our clients on trying to secure funds or secure other issues, regulatory issues relative to the North Carolina General Assembly and the regulatory agencies, and also the United States, the federal government. We have a similar project to this has been, but not nearly on the same scale. We represented the town of Boone in an infrastructure issue in trying to secure a water intake system from the New River. And that was about a 5-year project, a lot like this project is going to be over time. John is my son. He's been working with us for about 10 years. John and I together have 25 years of experience or so working with the General Assembly and with the United States government. What our goal is and what we want to do and is to look at that $87.5 million, is to look to the North Carolina General Assembly, to look at the United States Congress, to look to wherever we can to try to secure funding for the town. Now, how do we do that? That's a lot of times people have real misconceptions about the kind of firm that we are and how we do that. Let me just say, initially, our approach is, and John and I do this, and we work with the client, we work with a lot of folks, we try to, before we mention to anybody what our needs are, is to work out a very strong approach, to work out a systematic plan, a strategic plan, one that's based on data, one that's based on, we try to work smart in what we do. Some elements of that plan, and I'll just be very short, the very first element of that plan is that you spend a lot of time understanding your client and understanding the issue that's in front of you. And that's what part of what we're doing today and what we've been doing for the last month. We were engaged about a month ago. And I will tell you, walking away from today, the takeaway is that the problems and the infrastructure needs of the town of Lake Lure are extensive, they're expensive, and it's going to take time to address these issues. Our method is pretty straightforward. We try to identify funding sources. We identify the decision makers about that funding sources. We identify ways that it gets from point A to point B, and point B in this case is the town of Lake Lure. We also help the town develop a clear and concise message about what they need. And part of that message, let me just be, in addition to what we have here, the needs of the town, but let me just say, and I would invite you to look on page 7 of your manual. Please know, folks, you're not alone. And the managers spoke eloquent about it this morning at one of the other sessions. There are so many other issues. There's so many other people that are affected by that dam and by the infrastructure problems that you face here in Lake Lure. It is a regional project. I really believe that. So many folks in terms of economic development, the chambers of commerce, tourism, the hotel industry, the real estate industry, other county governments, environmentalists, all are going to be impacted over time by what we do here today. And we need to engage them. We need to engage those folks into that coalition in Western North Carolina. Let me just, I want to close to say again, thank you. And just say to you, and just brag on this council for a moment. Another part of my life, I was a county manager in Buncombe County, and when I was part of that, when I was manager there, we went through some major infrastructure issues like you did here. We had to build a jail, we had to site a landfill, both of them 50-year, in the case of the jail, a 75-year issue. And it is very difficult to go into the council and recommend, or that case, my commission, that they raise taxes or they raise the tipping fee at the landfill or they whatever it was with the enterprise funds to raise the necessary funds to do it. But I will tell you, in this case, it will pay off because it helps us so much going to folks like Senator Heiss or whoever it may be and make our case, and we're able to say our town is doing its part. Our town has put in place responsible tax increases, responsible funding sources to address these issues. I'm excited about this project. I'm excited about working with the town. I keep dropping stuff. I'm excited about working with the town, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I have some questions up here. Are we good with questions? Okay. As we said earlier, this is the third session for today. Folks have asked questions. Those questions will get answered. We'll get part of a FAQ and we'll get put online so that you folks can see, if you didn't think about it tonight, you may think about it on the drive home. Someone probably thought about a question to ask. There will be those FAQs, and I am sure after working with these folks for the little bit that I have, that they will do everything they can to answer your questions in the future as well. So here are the two questions that we have right now. We're going to throw it out to the group. What level, and that's in quotes, is considered reservoir drain?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think it's on. So typically a reservoir drain requirement, I assume the question refers to what would be the level the reservoir drain could draw the lake down to. And typically from a dam safety requirement, a reservoir drain targets about 90% of the reservoir volume. So you would have the ability to drain that much. Again, the purpose of the reservoir drain, that's not a routine thing. Really the reservoir drain here is there for emergency purposes only. Should there be a need to draw it down significantly, but it also serves the benefit, like we've mentioned, of several other things that require a much, not even close to that 90% level drawdown, like the sewer, repairs, dredging, and that sort of thing. But, roughly speaking, it would be, in terms of what 90% means to Lake Lure, that's about 90 feet below the lake level as it currently is.
In terms of the using it as a sewer access valve, our target would be about 20. Your current available with the spillway is 12. So this would be 8 or 10 feet below the current minimum.
Okay, related to that, when that happens, are steps taken regarding the concern for wildlife? We had that question earlier today. Fish, other wildlife around it. What steps are taken when that reservoir drain takes place?
Yeah, I mean, as a part of any, I mentioned earlier, as part of any major infrastructure project, you have to evaluate those environmental effects. To be, if you were to have to operate the reservoir drain and completely drain the lake, again, in the event of a serious dam safety emergency, would be the only time you would draw it down to, that level of where it's located, way down in the bottom of the lake. If you were to do that, kind of the dam safety emergency is the priority there. That's what you're trying to protect. It's a public safety thing, trying to reduce dam safety risks. So certainly from that perspective, public safety would take the priority if you had to draw it down that far, if that answers the question. And Reese may be able to add something there.
From a sewer side, again, dropping the lake down 20 feet, a foot at a time, it's assumed that the fish and aquatic animals, that drawdown is so slow, they would just migrate toward deeper portions of the lake.
So as far as frequency concerned, there's a safety, that's an infrequent event. And then from a maintenance perspective, you're talking about going down 20 a foot at a time. So the last question on this card was about frequency. There's a safety frequency, which is rare.
Yeah, it may, hopefully will never need to be operated to that level.
And then a maintenance of 12 feet to 20 feet. Okay.
Scott, if I could expand on that a little
Yes,
bit.
sir.
So this is a hugely important point because the valve has two functions, an operational function and an emergency function. On the operational side, right now we can take it down to 12. As they stated, we can take it down to 20. That buys us, that extra 8 feet with that valve buys us tremendous amount of leverage. It'll save us money because the designers of the sewer system now have more gravity on their side to make it more efficient. So that valve being able to go down to 20 will save us money. It'll also save wear and tear on the boathouses because the wave action down at 20 feet isn't like the wave action at 12 feet where it hits your seawalls and it hits your docks at a lower level. So the erosion theoretically goes down by going down that 20 feet. So that's operational. Wildlife not affected. We know what they've done at 12 feet. 20 feet is not a big deal. Emergency, going from 20 down to 90, we hope we never use, okay? Because that means that you're going to be draining the lake. Sedimentation goes through that valve into the broad river, not good. Fish have nowhere to go, they'll get confused. Birds will no longer have the wetlands needed to be migrating through the area. So that emergency use of the valve, we hope we never use. But as state dam safety will tell you, having the ability in the case of emergency to have that valve could potentially save lives in the future. So two different functions, same valve, big value for us. Thank you, Scott.
How long, this is on the dam, how long will it take to complete the project?
Well, that's like any of this stuff, it's a complex, can be a complex answer to that question. But for either of the options, I mentioned rehabilitation or replacement. If the funding was in place to do all of that work, in one, what we'll call mobilization at one time, the construction of those options would take probably on the order of 30 to 36 months, 2.5 to 3 years for the rehabilitation project, and likely a little bit longer, 3 to 3.5 years for a replacement project. Now, that's an estimate, and that may be on the high end of that duration for construction. Certainly, there's a lot that goes into that as well beforehand. The design process, which takes typically on the order of a year plus to go through everything on that end. So, but it depends. Like I said before, there's some work that's being, it may depend on if you phase the project and how the project's phased. So hopefully that answers that question. But I guess the short answer is if you had everything in place and you said, we want a new dam or we want a major rehabilitation, it would probably from this point forward, it would probably be on the order of 4 to 5 years before you had it if you started today.
Jonathan, if you could also add to that, how long the existing dam can last?
Yeah, that's also not an easy question to answer, but the question was, what's the remaining service life of the existing dam? And, it's hard to say, look at it, even do a lot of analysis and say this will last X more years. But, it depends a lot on how it's maintained. There's interim repairs that may be required to address it. And certainly some of it's, outside influence in terms of if you were to get one of the major floods we talked about or a major earthquake, that would certainly influence that timeline. But, I think, it could be 10 plus years that the dam remains. It could certainly be more than that if it's maintained and there aren't any outside loading conditions that dramatically impact that.
Okay, we're going to go on to sewer now. The first question regarding sewer is what happened to the agreement with the town of Spindale? And this could be for any one of the elected officials as well. What happened to the agreement with the town of Spindale regarding the sewer?
I can speak to that, and Kurt can also. And I can turn it over to Mr. DiOrio. Kurt Wright and I with STD Engineering participated in the rehabilitation of the Spindale wastewater treatment plant. So we were involved on the Spindale side in that negotiation. And the sticking point for us was what would happen in the event of a sewer failure that resulted in sending lake water to Spindale. So from our view, working for Spindale, looking at the operation of the plant, that was ours. And Commissioner DiOrio can add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Reese. Can you hear me? So one of the things before you start any project, one of the biggest questions you got to ask is, what problem am I trying to solve? And when we took a look years ago with the Green Line project, the issue was the wastewater treatment plant wasn't treating the water adequately, so we'll send it to the best plant we have in the region. That would be Spindale. The problem with that approach was, and it doesn't fix the problem. The problem is that there's a degradation of the sewer collection system with lake infiltration. So all we were doing with that entire project was taking our problem with large infiltration and shipping it to Spindale. And when Spindale, who agreed to receive it, when they realized that, they said, oh, that's a problem to treat that kind of water. Here's the price tag that you need to pay us to treat that problem that you never fixed. So that the whole basis for the Green Line project was flawed in its beginning because it didn't have a holistic view of the project. Now we know a lot. And I'll say with the amount of money, because the sewer rates went up about 3 or 4 years ago to pay for the Green Line, that $12.5 million. One of the first questions I asked was, what happened to that money? What did we do with it? And the answer is a little complicated, but I'll go through it with you. We had money set aside for the green line, but a couple things went south very quickly for us. The collection system continued to degrade, which caused us to actually do more with the wastewater treatment plant, like buy more chemicals, more oversight, and started to suck up that money that we were trying to build up in reserve for that 12.5 million. In addition, the engineering analysis to figure out what the problem was cost us a lot of money. So we spent that money that we were raising 3 years ago to try to define the problem to get to where we are today. So it wasn't wasted money. We know a lot more about the system today. So today, your increase in the sewer is going directly to solve the problem because we know more about that. So that's basically what happened with the Green Line project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, and these two questions go together. Would any portion of the HDPE sewer line be buried along the shoreline? Secondly, are the plans firm to install perimeter drains in backshore? What happens to the existing structures in that backshore area? So I put that together as one question for you guys.
So if you would imagine if you were leaving here and going to the beach and you're going around 9 and you're looking on your right-hand side and you're looking down toward the water, and you realize how steep the topography is. And that's one of the issues that you're facing here, is this isn't Florida, it's not flat. And so trying to pump water uphill because it naturally flows downhill. So around the perimeter of the lake is the most logical location to put the system. And I would say that the plans are very fixed to put the pipe in the backshore. In terms of structures, there will be some conflict with existing structures, and we've spoken with contractors about how that would be interplayed. And that would be on a case-by-case basis, but certainly during the construction phase, every care would be given toward maintaining the integrity of the existing structures we come in contact with.
Okay, we're going to go into dredging questions now. Okay, is lake being lowered in the fall of 2020? This person's not clear, so they're asking it this way. Is it being lowered in the fall of 2020 and again in 2021? I know you're going to talk about the schedule.
All right.
And how much each year? The schedule only says 12/20 start.
Sure. In order to answer that question, I'll ask you to turn to page 19 in your booklet. I put this schedule together, and as long as I'm the town engineer here, that's one of the tasks I have, is to manage the lake drawdown from whenever it's required. It was required last year. It's required again this winter. And when I say this winter, I'm meaning typically December and January. So I have to work in conjunction with all your department heads. So just to give you an idea, for example, and I work also obviously in conjunction with your commissioners. So one of the first questions is relative to Dean Lindsay. Mr. Dean Lindsay is the new director of the hydroelectric facility. When you draw down the lake, that impacts your revenue stream from Duke Energy. So I have to coordinate that with Mr. Lindsay. We also have to coordinate that with timing relative to your consultant LaBelle Associates regarding additional engineering data that's required. So the short answer is, on this schedule, which the commissioners are currently considering, the drawdown will start the Monday after New Year's, which would be January 4th. And you'll see that on the schedule. So in order to read that schedule, you see a column, and at the top of the column is a date. That date is the Monday of that week. So each column represents a week. The week is identified by the date that falls on that Monday. So you see that Monday, January 4th, the drawdown starts. It will take all of January in order to draw down the lake get the lake level where we can safely do the work that needs to be done. I'll explain that in a moment. When that work is finished, then to fill it back up. And typically we use 1 foot per day. Now, the 1 foot per day is almost guaranteed on the drawdown because there's always water in the lake. So you're trying to draw it down. So you will get a production of 1 foot per day. The problem is filling it back up. You need rain. But typically during January is a wet month and you don't experience drought like you might in a summer month. So you can expect to fill it back up at a rate of 1 foot per day. But it does take Mother Nature to cooperate with that. So we still use 1 foot per day, both on the drawdown and filling it back up. The tasks that need to be done on this chart, one of them is to go back into the penstock. Now that's eyes on the interior skin of the penstock, which requires man entry. So in order to do that safely, the water has to be well below the mouth of the intake structure. Okay? Even though there is a can, we call it a can, it's a gate, you could call it a valve, but essentially it's a tin can that falls, metal can that falls over the mouth of the opening that actually ends up in the penstock. And that's the hoist that was talked about that was replaced so you could lower safely this heavy, round, cylindrical structure over top of the mouth. That is not a safety seal-off when there's a man in the pipe because it can fail. Something can go wrong. If the water is a couple of feet below the intake, then you're safe. Because if you had a major storm coming, you would know it and nobody can go in the pipe. See if you can see the logic of that. So I personally have been in that pipe for many hours when we rehabilitated it. And so we are going to do a follow-up 1-year warranty inspection because the warranty is going to expire in January. There's a 1-year labor on both materials and labor. So there are certain indicators that we look for to see if the internal lining has begun to fail. If it has, we can flag that to the installer and they have to repair that under warranty. So we want to take advantage of any warranty repair. That's one item that's going to be done this winter. Another item that needs to be done is LaBelle Engineers has several items that they need to work on. I won't explain to them, but they're here for you. I know it's fine print, and I'm sorry for that. But it's explained under LaBella. It's an orange bar, and you can see what needs to be done. I'll just pick one randomly. They're going to take a high-resolution drone that's going to fly when the water is down. They're going to fly the perimeter of the lake where the rehab is going to occur so they can zoom in. The current data, you can't zoom in very well. High resolution, you can, to see what is actually there. So those are just some of the items. Now, regarding the penstock is a repair. That repair needs to be inspected. One of the deficiencies, if you will, over the last many years of the penstock is that it had not been inspected. As far as I know, there had been no pipe condition assessment of the penstock probably in its life until we rehabilitated. So that past behavior will not continue in the future. There will be periodic inspections. The time period has not been set. We'll work on the time period after we go in there this winter to see if there's been any deficiencies. If there's been no observable red flags, then we can begin to set the frequency for inspection. It might be 5 years, but we have to work on that. So the penstock, just to do pipe condition assessment to maintain that asset, requires inspection. there during the time, for example, this winter, this chart that you're looking at, Mr. Dean Givens knows that's the slot that he has to do heavy silt removal. So every time there is a chart like this, Mr. Givens is looking at it to see when he can do his silt removal. So that attempts to answer that question. I hope I've satisfied the individual who asked the question.
Last question on dredging. Does dredging include Rumbling Bald Resort?
I have to turn to Mr. Givens to answer that. Mr. Givens said Rumbling Bald Resort has not made any requests this year.
Was there a follow-up question to me?
No, I don't think so, but I would like to turn to Commissioner DeOrio to talk about the schedule for drawdowns as well, to add input.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so it's important to set an expectation for drawdown of the lake. And I'll tell you that we all should be in the mode, me as well, I live on the lake, that lake is going to be drawn down on a regular basis for at least some part of time every year to get this sewer system in. But here, the town council, we're very sensitive to that. We're going to minimize that. And in order to make sure that we minimize the amount of time that the water is down, we could use your help, because we're going to need to know what you need to do in any given year on your seawalls and what your concerns are to try to frame up this 5-year plan. We are going to make sure that the engineering group is ready to work at the time of drawdown. So we're not sitting there with a drawdown waiting for them to get started. So we'll maximize the amount of time that we have. Also worth mentioning is, as we go through the sewer project, we're gonna, and the people doing the construction, they're gonna get better at it. So we'll get more efficient as we go along. But we can use your help with information, you know what you need, but even more importantly, to afford us access for that sewer system. Now, if you can imagine, this thing is gonna go around the lake, and we're gonna need to come to you to determine where we're gonna put those stub outs, how we're gonna get to the water, how can we get material in there. Your cooperation and consensus, particularly with your neighbors, is gonna facilitate that, which means less time that the water needs to be down. But right now, I would say get in the mode in the off-shoulder seasons, you know, the winter seasons, to have that lake come down, either to do engineering analysis or actual construction. I think we're gonna be in that mode for a while.
I would like to add one thing about phasing. I don't know if it was clear, but I'll state that the first phase of the sewer replacement project will start at the dam. It's a logical place to start, and then you build out from there.
All right. Seth, I think this is going to be your area, and Shannon and finance. What is the probability of the ad valorem tax rate of 6% for this year continuing every year going forward? How many years do you anticipate it going forward?
I'll start by saying that it's going to depend on what our needs are. Certainly, the ad valorem tax being raised to deal with the issues that you have already heard need to be addressed is going to be part of that. But keep in mind, separate and apart from that, you have normal day-to-day operations of a town of 1,200 that has nothing to do with a dam or sewer or dredging. So those needs are still going to be there. But I can't really sit here and tell you year after year how many pennies of taxes are going to be raised until we get into a fiscal year and we start to develop the budget and we have public hearings and we incorporate certainly your input as we move forward. Seth may have a clearer answer or a better answer than I would.
I think that's a good answer. What I would say is it's largely dependent on the source of funding for the dam project and the timing of the dam project.
Seth, I think that deserves a good follow-up question, because I think you're absolutely correct. Are there any plans then, Seth, Council, Shannon, to investigate general obligation bonds or any other type of financing structure that may take you beyond a certain length of time, a shorter length of time, like 12 years or 10 years?
I think the short answer would be we're going to investigate whatever instruments
are available to us to give us the best possible way to finance these projects. I think another thing I would add to that is certainly if we were to receive a write-in, a special appropriation, say from General Assembly or something from maybe even from Washington that could facilitate a large sum of money coming our way, that certainly changes basically the instruments that we would choose to finance the remaining portion. So a lot of it depends on how successful we are in filling that $87 million gap that's there, which is absolutely enormous for a town of 1,200. Outside injections of money, we have to find a way to secure that along with the partnerships with other stakeholders that are really vested in our future. It's not just Lake Lure, the surrounding towns, counties, and even the region, and making sure that this town is successful. The state park, for example, they need infrastructure. They need sewer. If our sewer were to shut down, a no flush order goes into effect. You can't use a bathroom at the state park. They have plans to connect their sewer to ours. It hasn't been done yet, but that is their plan to facilitate their growth. It's going to affect more than just the folks in Lake Lure. It's going to affect the Lake Lure, Chimney Rock Village, the state park, and even communities like Rolling Ball Resort, which is technically in our town limits.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is I don't think there's anything that's off the table. It's more about having a funding plan of trying to go for the best funding and working your way down. And once again, that goes with timing and everything else. We've run scenarios for multiple different funding options and know what those costs are that are associated with that. But I would say general obligation bonds are probably towards the lowest end of the list. There tends to be better funding options with much better terms that are much more likely than ever getting to general obligation bonds. They're kind of the last resort.
Does that also include other taxes, lodging taxes, or other types of special sales taxes in the request and the consideration in your funding plan?
Well, I would say that there is significant amounts of revenue that are generated in the town of Lake Lure when a person comes and stays overnight in our lodging facilities. And those taxes are collected and they go to Rutherford County, and then Rutherford County distributes those through the Rutherford County TDA. And certainly having a way that we could reuse or recycle those funds back into our infrastructure that basically is not only helping those who are year-round and second homeowners, but largely is helping the tourists who come. I remember the Arnett Muldrow study that we had done said Lake Lure has the most tourism-based economy of any other jurisdiction they had ever studied, and they do studies across the nation. So it is important to us to find those outside sources of revenue.
Okay, and the last question is, how will residents with lift stations to street level sewer service be affected by the sewer plant?
Could you repeat that again?
Okay. How will residents with lift stations to street level sewer service be affected by the sewer plan?
So if you're in a situation where you have a pump that pumps into a land-based system, that land-based system would ultimately flow into the submerged system. And so that would be a point that it's picked up. If you're a situation where you are pumping kind of up and around your neighbor, there would be several options to you. If you're a lakefront property, then this system will be going basically in front of your house. And conceivably, you could bypass your pump and go down and tie in directly to the system without the pump. So again, laterals and tie-ins, in some cases would need to be a case-by-case basis, but essentially the system is going to completely surround the perimeter of the lake. So if you have property that fronts the lake, this will run right across in front of that property.
Was there another question being written out there? You guys good? Okay, just wanted to make sure and verify that. Thank you. That is all the questions, Madam Mayor. Turn it back over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. The point of these meetings was to make sure that everyone in the community of Lake Lure is aware of what our challenges are and how we are hoping to resolve those problems and how we will find the financial means to do that. So we appreciate that very much. We'd like to thank our moderators, Mr. Scott Gadsden from Isothermal Planning and Development Commission and Mr. Kurt Wright for moderating our technical questions. I'd also like to thank all of our consultants and allies here, both engineering, financial, and public policy. Also, our state regulators for helping us to understand how our goals mesh to make sure that we're in compliance with state regulations. And certainly Senator Heiss, we appreciate so much your being here. And also Brian King, who's here by Zoom. It is, our issues are not limited just to Lake Lure. They certainly are county issues because what happens to anyone in the county affects everyone in the county. So we appreciate their input as well. I also would like to give a special thank you to all the staff under the direction of our town manager, Shannon Baldwin, for supporting these meetings, in particular Laura Creegee, who has been tireless in her efforts to create this, and we appreciate it so much. She is such an asset to our town. Also with her, Mitchell Anderson, who wears lots of hats here, but one tonight that was most important to us or today is his IT expertise and keeps us all available to attend by Zoom, particularly in this time when we're so cognizant of that with COVID looming. And also Michelle Jolly, our town clerk, who keeps us on course and legal. So we thank all of those people. We certainly hope today's meeting gave you better insight and more understanding of this year's budget, the Lake Lure 2021 budget, certainly with respect to property taxes, increases in property taxes, increases in the water sewer rates, and also our lake use fees. These are critical issues that we're required to address, including the dam, the sewer, and the dredging. These repairs cannot be put off. They have to be done now in order for us to ensure that we avoid a catastrophe, to respond to state mandates, certainly, to maintain our viable community, and probably very much as well important to preserve Lake Lure for future generations. You know, for this reason, it was necessary that we increase the tax rates and sewer rates. I thank you all for being at this meeting and thank you for your attention. We appreciate everyone's support.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting stands adjourned. Thank you so much.